Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Greetings. Welcome to the bonus show. Here is an opportunity to talk about Seinfeld, which David and I are in agreement that it's the best sitcom ever. And for me, in a close second is 30 Rock, but that's just me. I know they're very different shows, but I think some of the characters in those two shows exhibit some of the same traits. Perhaps the writers of 30 Rock learned something from Seinfeld, but medical students are also learning something about Seinfeld. They are learning about psychiatric disorders. Now, this is something I never really thought about when I was watching Seinfeld. I just kind of accepted the characters and watched their amusing antics. But this is, I guess, this is really happening in med school. So at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School in New Jersey, psychiatry professor Anthony Tobia, I guess is how you pronounce it, is teaching third and fourth year medical students in the hospital's psychiatric rotation about psychiatric disorders through Seinfeld. And they are calling the exercise Psyfeld, Psy-Feld. The students are required to watch 2 repeat episodes of the show a week, which I guess still is airing on TBS, and come to class ready to discuss the psychopathology demonstrated in each one. There's a quote here saying, "When you get these friends together, the dynamic is such that it literally creates a plot. Jerry's obsessive-compulsive traits combined with Kramer's schizoid traits, with Elaine's inability to forge meaningful relationships, and George being egocentric." And when it's put that way, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But why doesn't that occur to you necessarily when you're just watching the show, despite being huge fans like we are?
Oh, it does occur to me. And I've read an interesting book called Seinfeld on Philosophy or something like that, which is 10 or 12 different essays written by different philosophers, each one focusing on a particular aspect of Seinfeld. And these exist for other shows as well. That stuff does occur to me. This is pretty interesting. And I remember in some other courses, pieces of The Simpsons being used actually to outline certain concepts. It was a communications class, I believe. This is pretty cool. I mean, if I can imagine that med students are under a lot of pressure, they're doing a lot of studying and a lot of different stuff, and maybe watching a couple episodes of Seinfeld a week is a pretty good thing.
I find that perhaps I didn't think about it because traditionally I don't like to deconstruct what I'm watching when I'm watching a show or a movie. Or,
yeah, you don't want to analyze it too deeply, huh?
That's not what I mean. I am focused more on the narrative rather than things like this. You know, I don't really know how to say it, but unless I'm watching a movie multiple times or something like that. Now, just talking about movies, I tend not to. That's when I tend to start to deconstruct it, and I start looking at focusing more on the cinematography or focusing more on other aspects of it. But I guess when I'm watching TV, I just want to zone out, and I don't want to really think too much unless I'm watching some cerebral documentary or something of that sort. But anyway, that's what's happening with Seinfeld, and I'm glad it's kind of being kept alive here because sitcoms have a tendency to kind of disappear.
I still watch episodes of Seinfeld every once in a while. I mean, they're on TV just all the time. And it's funny how dated some of the things start to feel, the way people are dressed, the old Apple computer in the corner of Jerry's apartment. You know, there's certain elements that when you see it, it really starts to feel dated, but the comedy in it still holds up completely.
The content, I believe, is timeless, and I think that's why it's held up so well. You could say the same about any TV show that has held up that well. It just, the content ends up being timeless. Okay, here's something incredible. And this story has been going around the web. It's viral is an understatement. But after Kanye West put out some collaboration with Paul McCartney, it became clear that many Kanye West fans did not know who Paul McCartney was. Now, I'm not saying that if you mention the Beatles, they wouldn't know who the Beatles are. I think they probably do. But Paul McCartney has still, as a solo artist, been making music
For
this whole
decades.
time. The whole time. And some of the tweets that came out are just incredible. One of them here says, who TF, which I'm guessing means the fuck, is Paul McCartney? This is why I love Kanye, for shining light on unknown artists. Who is Paul McCartney? Why do people love him? I still don't know who Paul MacArthur is. Who is Paul McCartney? He's about to blow up thanks to Kanye. Incredible. What do you make of this? Is this just how things are because young people just haven't been exposed to this?
Right. My reaction initially was, wow, look at how uninformed these people are. But at the same time, I started thinking, if when I was, 15, someone who was popular in 1999 came out with an album where they're singing and they're really popular, and the person playing the piano on the album is someone that had been around since, I don't know. I mean, the Beatles have been around since the 60s, so 40 years prior. The 50s, the late 40s, early 50s. It's possible that it's not someone who would have been on my radar. I mean, now, would I have gone to Twitter and made it incredibly public? I don't really know. Would I have assumed that a 70-year-old man, or however old Paul McCartney is, he must be close to 70, that this was the first musical thing he ever did at that age? That would seem unusual to me, right? So for other reasons, I might not go to Twitter and start putting some of these messages up. But I at first I was about to be super critical, and then I said, well, let me think of the context.
Yeah, I think in some cases it's understandable. Someone made an astute point here, and that is, these people didn't even spend 10 seconds doing a Google search on Paul McCartney.
Right. I mean, obviously, if you put his name into Google, immediately you figure out who he is.
That's right. And then somehow looking at all the messages, and I guess they weren't looking at any of the messages or reading any of the articles or doing anything of the sort. They probably just heard the name and didn't recognize it and immediately took to Twitter. But I don't know. I was kind of taken aback by this. But then when I think about it, I think, yeah, you know what? I guess it kind of makes sense. But I guess a lot of these people received some pretty vicious backlash in response to the tweets.
Yeah.
And I mean brutal. But
Lewis, internet's is pretty serious business, as you know.
Internet is serious business. Those tubes, there's a lot going on in those tubes. And I'm sure they all know now who Paul McCartney is. So lesson learned. And hopefully they're not taking too much heat anymore because of this. But Paul McCartney is a Beatle, in case you didn't know. Some people think he's not really the original Paul McCartney because some people think that the original Paul McCartney died, and there's this big conspiracy theory.
And they found another left-handed bass player who looks just like Paul McCartney.
Who's British.
Who's also British, yeah. Well, you could fake the British accent.
Yeah, but his is pretty convincing. So, okay. Here's an interesting story. HarperCollins put out a book, an atlas, that omitted Israel from maps of the Middle East, citing local preferences as the reason that Israel was not listed, was not named as a country in the Middle East. Strangely, it still showed the West Bank, and Gaza is there. Of course, all the surrounding countries, but there's no mention of Israel. And of course, once people realized this was happening, they stopped selling it. But they are just kind of saying that, well, this is the preference in the places where these were being sold, and that was pretty much it. How can you use that as an excuse?
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. And the thing to me is that, again, this is a double standard, that it's a standard that it does not get applied to any other country. And people sometimes feel that you can apply a double standard to Israel because the country has been around for fewer years than other countries. And the reality is that that doesn't factually change the existence of the country. Maps are actually a really, really huge way in which people learn about politics, and maps have huge geopolitical implications. So even if the preference, yes, we know that many of the countries in the region don't want Israel to exist and have a huge problem with Jews. We know that, right? So acquiescing to that and removing the country from the map is not going to make anything better. It's just going to make the problem worse. It's increasingly confusing, and it can even further delegitimize the fact that, hey, this country exists. I think it was the dumbest possible move and an even dumber explanation.
But now HarperCollins is a business, and I would assume you agree with me that this was a business decision. Although probably a bad one, it did work for several months. And it was a business decision because they probably assumed that had Israel been labeled on this map, perhaps they would not have been able to sell these atlases, these maps in the countries we're talking about. And they might, those who were buying it might have gone with a different company. So as a business decision, was this still the right decision?
I believe it was not, because it was destined to eventually blow up in their faces, and it has the potential to have negative repercussions. I still think that it was not the right decision.
All right. Well, they have apologized, and that was pretty much the end of it. But it is still very strange that the West Bank was clearly marked, but Israel was not. I don't see how you can do that. That doesn't make much sense to me. Can you explain that?
Well, yeah, you're right in the sense that the delineation of the West Bank and Gaza are directly related to the borders of Israel. So the idea of having that, it's just short-sighted. It doesn't make any sense. It was a dumb move.
Yeah, very dumb. But like I said, it's not happening anymore. So they put an end to that because of people like us took to the media and the interwebs and let people know. So no more of that. But a bad business decision, but probably strictly a business decision. I don't know if the higher ups at HarperCollins had a hand in this, if they think that Israel shouldn't exist and that's why they were doing this. But the rest of their maps and atlases being sold in other places, of course, have Israel correctly labeled.
So they're generally willing to admit that Israel is a country that exists.
I believe that is what they are doing. Yes. Anyway, bonus show. Anything to add, Dave?
I've got nothing else.
Can you just tell us what's up with that sweater you're wearing, please?
Nothing. It's just a sweater. I mean, I don't know. What do you mean?
Well, I'm not a fan. I think it's a little outrageous, and it's a little too bright. I think it's a little too bright. What people don't know is that it kind of matches with the wall behind the TV, which they can't see. But it's kind of like this orangey color. Anyway, I'm not a big fan of that sweater. Let me know if you agree. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.